Greetings, road warriors. Tonight, our chronicle covers the digital highways, the story of a game that somehow became more than a game, a quiet phenomenon that captured the rhythm of the open road. Imagine it for a moment. The soft glow of the dashboard lights reflecting on a clean windshield, the low steady rumble of a diesel engine beneath you, the repetitive thwack-thwack of the wipers clearing away a digital rainstorm. The only thing you're really burning, of course, is a little bit of electricity and perhaps some midnight oil. It's a strange world we live in, but one we all appreciate. Let's be honest, backing a 53-foot trailer into a tight, cluttered loading dock on the first try is a feeling that never gets old. Even if, in reality, you just had to press F7 and call for roadside assistance because you high-centered the trailer on a curb you swore wasn't there. We've all been there. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from tonight and what time it is in your part of the world. It's always fascinating to see where these stories are rolling out to. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The human mind is a peculiar place. We spend our days working, navigating complex social rules, managing responsibilities, and facing consequences. Then, we come home, sit down, and choose to work some more. On paper, it makes absolutely no sense. Why would anyone, after a grueling day at the office, choose to unwind by pretending to be a long-haul truck driver, or a farmer, or a city manager? The entire simulation genre, when you look at it under harsh fluorescent light, seems absurd, and yet, it's one of the most compelling and enduring genres in electronic entertainment. The answer, of course, isn't that we love work, it's that we love mastery. Specifically, we crave low-stakes mastery. Think about it. In the real world, operating a 40-ton articulated vehicle is an immense responsibility. It requires intense training, constant situational awareness, and adherence to a mountain of stringent federal regulations. A moment's lapse in judgment doesn't just mean a bad score, it can mean catastrophe. It's a high-stakes, high-stress profession. But in the digital world, the truck, the cargo, the laws of physics, they are all yours to command. If you misjudge a corner and roll your rig down an embankment, the only consequence is a small financial penalty in your virtual bank account and a short fade to black. This psychological safety net is everything. It's the magic ingredient that transforms a high-stress job into a meditative Zen-like experience. This is the core appeal of the simulation. It's not an escape from work. It's an escape into a version of work where you are in complete control, where the complex systems are understandable, and where your steady effort is always rewarded. There is no confusing office politics, no sudden corporate downsizing. There is only you, the machine, and the task. Pick up the cargo, drive, deliver the cargo, get paid. The loop is simple, pure, and deeply satisfying. It's mindfulness disguised as a video game. This desire for simulated reality is nothing new. While the earliest video games were abstract fantasies, titles like Microsoft's Flight Simulator, first released in 1982, proved there was a dedicated, serious audience that wanted realism. They wanted to learn to fly a virtual Cessna, complete with its complex cockpit and realistic handling. This was the seed of vehicle simulation. A few years later, a landmark game called SimCity arrived in 1989. It proved the other half of the equation. People loved managing complex systems. They enjoyed the job of being a mayor, of zoning land, managing budgets, and watching a complex system respond to their inputs. The truck simulator is the spiritual child of these two ideas: the technical mastery of Flight Simulator and the economic management of SimCity. And in the late 1990s and early 2000s, the technology was finally catching up to the dream. The origins of the genre are humble, existing in a strange budget bin world. The term simulator itself was almost a joke for a while, associated with bizarrely specific low-quality titles like Forklift Simulator or Street Cleaning Simulator. These were often clunky, physics-optional cash grabs, but the trucking subgenre was always a bit different. It was more earnest. The people playing these games weren't looking for a quick laugh, they were looking for an experience. This is where the direct ancestry of American Truck Simulator begins. Early attempts like Hard Truck and Cross Country Canada tried to capture the fantasy. The graphics were ambitious, let's say. We're talking rudimentary 3D, with 256 colours trying their best to represent the vastness of a continent. Dashboards were often just static, flat images. The physics were, to be polite, enthusiastic. You could often hit a guardrail at 80 miles per hour, bounce off and just keep on trucking. It was less a simulation of physics and more a vague suggestion of it. But they had the soul. They had the CB radio chatter, the grainy FM radio stations, the concept of way stations, and the economic loop. You started as a driver for hire, earning just enough to one day buy your own rig. This core progression was magnetic. It was this fledgling, passionate market that a small studio in Prague, Czech Republic, first targeted. The company was SCS Software, and their first major foray into the genre was a 2002 title published by ValueSoft called Hard Truck, 18 Wheels of Steel. This was the blueprint. It was a game that gave you a compressed, almost cartoonish version of the entire United States. You could drive from Los Angeles to New York in about 45 minutes. The cities were little more than a collection of prefabs and a few street blocks. The trucks were unlicensed, bearing names like Majestic or Titan, clear knockoffs of the real-world Kenworths and Peterbilts. And yet, for the community at the time, it was revolutionary. It was the first game that truly tried to tie the driving to a persistent business. The human element was there from the very beginning. Even with these primitive tools, a dedicated modding community sprang up. These were fans who weren't satisfied with the generic trucks. They would spend hundreds of hours diving into the game's simple config files, meticulously creating skins, new paint jobs, to make the Majestic look exactly like a real-world Peterbilt 379, complete with the proper logos and chrome. They built new trailers, tweaked the engine sounds, and tried to fix the game's floaty physics. This intense creative passion from the player base was a clear signal. The desire for a realistic trucking experience was far ahead of what the technology could deliver. The community wasn't just playing the game, they were actively trying to build the game they had always dreamed of. They wanted the chrome, they wanted the real engine noises, and they wanted the roads to feel right. They were, in effect, showing any developer who was willing to listen exactly what the future of the genre needed to be. This strange, symbiotic relationship, a small developer trying to build a world and a passionate community trying to perfect it, is the foundation upon which everything else was built. Before there was a billion-dollar simulation market, before virtual reality and photorealistic graphics, there was just this simple, shared dream. To capture the quiet dignity of the long haul, the hum of the tyres on asphalt, and the simple satisfaction of a job well done. That small developer, the one willing to listen, was hunkered down in Prague, Czech Republic. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, Prague was a city still finding its new identity in a post-Soviet Europe. It was a hotbed of technical talent and artistic creativity, but it wasn't a global centre for video game development. SCS Software wasn't a sprawling campus of glass and steel. It was, for all intents and purposes, just a handful of passionate programmers and designers. Founded in 1997 by Pavel Shibor, Martin Cherney and Peter Shibor, their background wasn't in trucking. It was in programming, engineering, and the broader, more academic world of simulation. They had cut their teeth on titles like Bus Driver and the Deer Hunter series, games that, while not glamorous, taught them the fundamentals of creating large outdoor environments and modelling vehicle behaviour. This was the era of physical media, the budget bin at the front of electronics stores. The PC gaming market was dominated by big box $50 titles, but there was a massive hungry market for games priced at $9.99 or $19.99. These were the games you'd buy on a whim. This was the world SCS Software inhabited. They became masters of a specific kind of development, rapid, iterative, and efficient. They weren't trying to create a multi-million-dollar blockbuster that would redefine the industry. They were trying to create a solid, functional, and fun product that could be profitable on a modest budget, published in a jewel case by companies like ValueSoft or Excalibur Publishing. This business model gave birth to the 18 Wheels of Steel series, the true ancestor of the game we know today. The series wasn't a single vision, it was a rapid-fire evolution, a new version appearing almost every single year. Each title was a refinement, a baby step forward. Their first hit, 2002's hard truck 18 Wheels of Steel, set the formula. It gave players the entire continental United States, sort of. It was a map where you could drive from Miami to Seattle in under an hour, a comical spiderweb of highways connecting cities that were often just 3 or 4 blocks of repeating buildings. But it didn't matter. It had the core loop. Take a job, haul the freight, manage your fuel, and avoid the strangely aggressive AI police. A year later, in 2003, came Across America. The graphics were a little sharper, the map a little more detailed. Then, in 2004, Pedal to the Metal arrived. This iteration added a crucial element of realism, a fatigue simulation. For the first time, your driver had to sleep. This simple mechanic, a key historical fact for the genre, completely changed the player's relationship with the game world. It was no longer a mad dash from coast to coast. It forced planning. You had to find a motel or a rest stop or risk dozing off at the wheel, which the game would simulate with a terrifying screen fade to black and the sound of a crash. This relentless pace continued. Convoy in 2005 tried to let you hire AI drivers and build your own fleet, though the AI's tendency to drive into mountains or pinball off guardrails made being a boss a uniquely frustrating experience. Then, in 2006, SCS released 18 Wheels of Steel, Haul-In. For many longtime fans, this is the title where everything clicked. The graphics engine, their in-house proprietary technology called Prism 3D, had received a major overhaul. The physics, while still gamey, finally felt like you were steering something with weight. The trucks had a sense of inertia, and braking wasn't an instantaneous affair. Haul-In was also the title that truly blew the doors open for the modding community. SCS, whether by design or by happy accident, had built their game on a fairly open and accessible file structure. A key technical detail was the use of simple .cs archive files, which were essentially just .zip files with a different extension. Inside, modders found plain text files for truck physics, engine definitions, and simple image files for textures. This was an invitation. Almost overnight, the community began to fix the game. They replaced the generic unlicensed Majestic and Sunray trucks with meticulous high-polygon models of real-world Peterbilt 379s and Kenworth W900s. They created sound mods, sampling real trucks, to replace the game's vacuum cleaner-like default sounds. They built map mods, adding legendary and difficult roads that SCS hadn't. SCS Software observed this explosion of creativity. They weren't precious about their creation. They seemed to understand that the modders were, in effect, volunteer developers, adding thousands of hours of value to their product for free. The release of American Long-Haul in 2007 was a further refinement of the Haul-In engine, expanding the map to include parts of Canada and Mexico. Then, a strange pivot. The 18 Wheels of Steel series went quiet, and SCS released Extreme Trucker. This was a different beast. Influenced perhaps by the rising popularity of reality TV shows like Ice Road Truckers, this game abandoned the open-world concept. Instead, it offered a series of high-risk, high-reward scenarios on specific dangerous maps. The treacherous Bolivian Death Road, the Australian outback with its massive road trains, and the titular ice roads. It was a test of skill, not a zen-like driving experience. It showed SCS was experimenting, pushing their Prism 3D engine to handle more complex physics and environmental challenges. Behind the scenes, the entire video game industry was shifting under their feet. The budget bin, physical copy market was collapsing. Digital distribution platforms, most notably Valve's Steam, were becoming the dominant force. The old model of releasing a new $20 game every year was no longer sustainable. Players were evolving. They didn't want a new disposable game. They wanted one game that would grow and evolve with them. They wanted a platform, a service. Long before that word became a corporate buzzword, SCS Software, with its small agile team and its efficient self-owned Prism 3D engine, was perfectly positioned for this new world. They had spent a decade building a relationship with a fiercely loyal community. They understood what their players wanted better than any big-budget publisher ever could, because their players were literally telling them and showing them through thousands of mods. They knew the future was in realism, in licensed trucks, in a larger, more believable world, and in long-term support. But before they could apply this grand new vision to the highways of America, they decided to start closer to home. In 2008, they had released the first Euro Truck simulator. It was a modest success, applying the Holland formula to a European setting, with its cab-over trucks and different road rules. It was a good test, but it was still built on the old technology. Now, they would take everything they had learned, from the business sim of Hard Truck, the physics of Holland, the environmental challenges of Extreme Trucker, and the community feedback of the modding scene, and pour it all into one definitive project. It would be their big gamble on the new digital-first world. This project was Euro Truck Simulator 2. It was this European sequel, not an American game, that would provide the money, the technology, and the final blueprint for the game we've all spent countless nights driving. The team at SCS Software, having spent a decade learning their craft in the trenches of the budget market, now stood at a crossroads. The old world of annual shrink-wrapped releases was dying, and the new world of digital distribution, dominated by platforms like Steam, was rising. They had a loyal community, a refined proprietary engine in Prism 3D, and a deep understanding of what truck simulation fans craved. They decided to bet the entire company on one definitive project. But it wasn't the American game. Not yet. It was Euro Truck Simulator 2. Released in the autumn of 2012, ATS 2 was a quiet revolution. On the surface, it looked like a polished version of its 2008 predecessor. But underneath the hood, it was a complete philosophical and technological reboot. This game was the blueprint. It was the testbed for every single idea that would later define American Truck Simulator. First, the technology. The Prism 3D engine was torn down and rebuilt. The 18 wheels of steel games, charming as they were, often felt like driving a cardboard box through a landscape of other, slightly smaller cardboard boxes. The new engine introduced a dynamic lighting model. For the first time, the sun cast long, realistic shadows that crept across your dashboard as the day progressed. Night driving became a truly atmospheric experience, a cocoon of darkness, punctuated only by your headlights and the distant glow of cities. The physics too were given an immense overhaul. This was no longer an arcade racer where you could take a corner at 60 miles per hour. The team implemented a far more complex simulation. A key technical detail was the introduction of a new suspension and tyre model. The virtual chassis now realistically flexed, and the tyres had a tangible, sticky feeling on the road. You could feel the weight of the cargo in a way that was simply absent before. A misjudged corner would send your trailer into a terrifying slow-motion roll. But the most significant technical decision was the scale. The old 18 wheels of steel maps were, to be blunt, glorified spiderwebs. ETS2 introduced a consistent locked-down 1/19 scale for the entire European continent. This meant that while the world was still compressed, the relationship between distance, time and speed was now believable. A 300-mile journey felt like a substantial undertaking. This consistent scale was the bedrock upon which a believable simulation could be built. It was no longer a quick dash, it was a job. With this new, robust platform, SCS faced its greatest challenge: licensing. The community was tired of driving the majestic and the valiant. They wanted the real thing, but convincing multi-billion-dollar corporations like Scania, Volvo, and MAN to let their serious industrial hardware be featured in a video game was an uphill battle. This human element, the quest for licensing, became a defining struggle for the team. The story goes that Pavel Shabor and the team spent years sending emails and making calls, mostly to no avail. The truck manufacturers just didn't get it. They saw games as toys for children and worried it would cheapen their brand. The key historical fact that changed everything was their breakthrough with Scania. SCS, in a bold move, managed to secure a meeting. They didn't just bring a PowerPoint presentation, they brought the game. They had already built a stunningly detailed high-polygon model of the Scania R-Series truck, all based on publicly available photos and brochures. They sat the Scania engineers down and let them drive their own creation. The engineers were reportedly astonished. They were floored by the attention to detail, the accuracy of the dashboard gauges, the sound of the engine, the way the suspension was modelled. They saw that SCS wasn't making a toy, they were making a passionate digital homage. They were celebrating the engineering. Scania signed on, and once that first respected domino fell, the others began to wobble. Volvo, MAN and DAF eventually followed. It was a monumental victory. It legitimised the entire genre. It was a shift from driving a truck to driving a Scania. This victory, won in the boardrooms of Europe, would be the exact strategy they would later deploy in America. Euro Truck Simulator 2 launched on Steam, and it did not, in fact, take the world by storm. There was no million-dollar marketing campaign. It was a slow burn, a word-of-mouth success that grew day by day, month by month, year by year. The rise of YouTube and the Let's Play phenomenon was a perfect catalyst. Viewers weren't watching for high-octane action. They were watching for the relaxing, almost ASMR-like quality of the long haul. Streamers would chat with their audience while navigating a tricky reverse park, and the community blossomed. The game just kept selling. It sold hundreds of thousands, then millions of copies. This modest Prague studio was suddenly and unexpectedly very successful. This runaway success provided two absolutely critical components for the American dream. The first, and most obvious, was the financial runway. ATS 2 became a cash printing machine, especially with the release of its first successful map expansion, Going East. For the first time in the company's history, SCS wasn't living from one budget bin contract to the next. They had a massive war chest. They could hire more developers, artists, and researchers. They could afford to be ambitious. They could afford to invest years of development into a new project without needing an immediate return. The second, and more important component, was the blueprint itself. ATS 2 had proven the game as a platform model. It proved that players would happily pay for high-quality map expansions. It proved that a dedicated post-launch team could continue to add features, like new trucks, sometimes for free once licensing was secured, and new game mechanics, to a base game years after its release. It proved that a digital-first release on Steam, coupled with a direct line of communication to the community via their blog and forums, was the future. The entire methodology was now clear. They had the engine, they had the business model, they had the licensing strategy, and they had the money. The success of Euro Truck Simulator 2 made American Truck Simulator an inevitability. The long-held dream of truly capturing the endless iconic highways of the United States was no longer a question of if, but how, and more importantly, when. With Euro Truck Simulator 2 performing beyond their wildest expectations, the offices at SCS Software were buzzing. The game wasn't just a success, it was a stable, reliable, and growing platform. The game-as-a-service model, built on a foundation of high-quality map DLCs and continuous free updates, was working. The company was financially secure, their reputation for quality was established, and their community was engaged and growing. The question that hangs in the air of any successful studio finally had a definitive answer. What's next? For SCS, next was always going to be America. It was the white whale. It was the long-held dream, the unfinished business from the decade they spent pumping out the 18 Wheels of Steel series. Those older games had been fun, commercially viable sketches, but they were not the truth. They hadn't captured the soul of American trucking. They were constrained by budgets, by technology, and by the relentless schedule of the budget bin market. Now all of those constraints were gone. They had the money, they had the technology, and they had the time to do it right. But this decision, while obvious, was not simple. It meant leaving a very comfortable nest. SCS was a Czech company. They were Europeans. They understood Europe on an instinctual level. They knew what a roundabout was supposed to look like. They understood the visual language of European road signs, the architecture of the cities, and the specific feel of an autobahn. Most importantly, they understood the trucks. The European cab-over engine, COE design, where the driver sits directly over the front axle, was what they had spent years perfecting. They had the physics, the 3D models, and the licenses. Pivoting to America meant throwing much of that hard-won comfort out the window. It was a journey into a landscape that was, for many on the team, almost alien. The American trucking experience is defined by things that are fundamentally different. First, and most iconic, are the trucks themselves. The dominant design in the US is the conventional cab, the long-nosed truck. This is the Peterbilt 379, Kenworth W900, the chrome-laden, eagle hood ornament icons of the road. This technical distinction in truck design was the first and most obvious hurdle. A conventional truck isn't just a different 3D model, it's a completely different driving experience. The driver sits behind the engine, looking out over a long hood. The turning radius is vastly larger. The wheelbase is longer, making tight city corners a new kind of challenge. The visibility is different, requiring new mirror placements, including the classic convex hood mirrors that are a staple of American rigs. The team couldn't just reskin their Scanias, they had to model an entirely new class of vehicle, with entirely new physics from scratch. Then there were the roads. The American road system is a different beast. The interstate highway system, that key geographic detail, initiated by President Eisenhower in 1956, is a marvel of engineering built for long-distance, high-speed travel. Its interchanges are often massive, complex stack or cloverleaf designs, far larger than most European junctions. But the differences went all the way down to the surface streets. The United States, for the most part, is built on a grid. This means four-way intersections with traffic lights and the dreaded, for a programmer, right turn on red rule. This single piece of traffic law, common in the US but rare in Europe, meant the game's AI traffic had to be taught a whole new set of behaviours. The AI couldn't just stop at a red light, it had to check for oncoming traffic from the left before making a turn. This was a significant coding challenge. Even the signage, from the green rectangular interstate markers to the imperial unit speed limits, miles per hour, not kilometres, had to be learned, catalogued and recreated by a team of European artists. Beyond the technical was the cultural. The vibe of American trucking is a global fantasy, exported through decades of film and music. It's the fantasy of Smokey and the Bandit, of convoy, of the lone hero against the vast open desert. It's the culture of massive, brightly lit truck stops that are more like small villages, the sound of CB radio chatter, and the authority of the way stations. To get this wrong, to deliver a sterile European version of America, would be a disaster. The human element within the studio was one of quiet pressure. They knew their largest and most vocal fan base was in North America. These were the players who had been lovingly modding Euro Truck Simulator 2 to add Kenworths and American-style trailers, desperately trying to bend the European game to fit their home. SCS had to deliver for them. The internal feeling was that this new project couldn't just be good, it had to be authentic. This led to the biggest business decision of all. American Truck Simulator would not be a DLC for ATS 2, it was too different. The systems, the trucks, the map, the rules, all of it required a fresh start. It would be a new, standalone game, built on the same core Prism 3D engine, but developed as a parallel product. It would live alongside ETS 2, sharing technology but forging its own identity. This was a risk. It split the development team and the community, but it was the only way to do justice to the subject. In September 2013, SCS Software made it official. They published a blog post titled The American Dream. It formally announced American Truck Simulator. The hype in the community was instantaneous and immense. The dream was finally happening. With that announcement, the digital crossing was complete. The team had pivoted. The conceptual challenge was over, and the monumental practical challenge had just begun. The programmers started tackling American traffic AI, the artists started studying photographs of the California coastline, and the vehicle team began the long, difficult process of trying to convince Peterbilt and Kenworth to follow in Scania's footsteps. The first ambitious step was to build, well, all of it. And that led to the single biggest problem they would face, the tyranny of scale. America is big. This is not a profound observation, but it is the single most important and defining challenge the SCS Software team faced. It's a bigness that is fundamentally different from the geography of Europe. Europe, which they had just successfully modelled in Euro Truck Simulator 2, is a continent of density. It's a mosaic of ancient countries, cities and villages, all stitched together by a complex web of roads. You can drive for 30 minutes in any direction from a major city and pass through multiple distinct towns and landscapes. The ETS2 119 scale, where 1 mile in-game represents 19 miles of real-world distance, was perfect for this. It compressed the drives, but maintained that crucial feeling of a dense, populated and ever-changing world. The United States, particularly the American West where they plan to start, is the exact opposite. It is a continent of vastness. It is a place defined by its emptiness, by colossal, monolithic landscapes, and by cities that are isolated islands of light separated by hundreds of miles of nothing. This is the tyranny of scale, and it presents a nightmarish problem for a game designer. If you were to apply that same 119 scale to the United States, the drive from Los Angeles to Las Vegas, A real-world journey of about 270 miles would be just over 14 miles of in-game road. At an average speed of 60 miles per hour, a player would complete this epic mind-clearing desert haul in about 14 minutes. It would feel less like a journey and more like a trip to the suburbs. The vibe would be completely wrong. The sense of epic scale, the feeling of being a small truck against a massive landscape, would be utterly lost. Conversely, consider the cities. American cities are not the compact medieval core towns of Europe. They are sprawling, decentralized concrete jungles. A key geographic detail is the sheer footprint of a city like Los Angeles. The LA metro area is a monstrous sprawl of over 4,800 square miles, stitched together by a legendary and complex freeway system. To represent LA at a 1/19 scale, the city would still have to be a tiny compressed dot, incapable of capturing the feeling of navigating the I-5 to I-10 interchange, or the long crawl down to the port of Long Beach. So, the team was trapped. A 1/19 scale made the cities too small, and the drives between them comically short. A larger, more realistic scale, like 110 or 1.5, would make the drives feel better, but the development time and data storage required to build even one state like California would be astronomical. It would take them a decade just to build the West Coast. This led to a practical, pragmatic, and ultimately fateful compromise. For the initial 2016 release of American Truck Simulator, which would feature just California and Nevada, the team made a critical decision. They would not use the 1/19 scale from ETS2. Instead, they would use a much more compressed 1/35 scale for the open highways. This decision was almost certainly born from a production spreadsheet. A 1/35 scale meant that the 270-mile trip from LA to Vegas would be a mere 7.7 miles of in-game road, a drive of less than 10 minutes. It was a massive compromise. The logic was likely that this compression would allow them to deliver the feeling of a large state with all its iconic cities in a playable package that a small team could actually finish and sell. It was a bet on quantity of landmarks over the quality of the journey. This created an immediate artistic and technical headache. Variable scale. You cannot build a city at 1/35. It would be literally one city block. So the team had to invent a bubble system. The open roads, the vast stretches of desert in Nevada, or the farmland of the Central Valley would be at 1/35. But as the player approached a city, the map's scale would invisibly and dynamically warp, expanding to something closer to 1/15 or 1/19. This allowed the artist to actually build functional intersections, place depots, and model a few key landmarks, like the Welcome to Las Vegas sign or the Golden Gate Bridge. If you've ever played that launch version of the game, you could feel this. The transitions were abrupt. You'd be speeding through the desert at 75 miles per hour, and suddenly you'd hit a city that was essentially just a complex freeway off-ramp with a few buildings hidden behind a sound wall. The sense of the world was distorted, like a model railroad layout where the town and the mountain are crammed unnaturally close together. This human element, the frustration of the artists, must have been palpable. Imagine being a 3D artist tasked with recreating the iconic, beautiful coastline of Highway 1. You spend weeks modelling the Bixby Creek Bridge, getting the arches and the concrete texture just right. But in the 1/35 scale world, your beautiful bridge is just a few short miles from the next city. The world had no room to breathe. The artists weren't world builders, they were digital impressionists, forced to capture the essence of California in a few, compressed, almost symbolic strokes. A key historical fact of the development is that this 1/35 scale was a direct pragmatic response to the sheer size of the geography. California alone is over 163,000 square miles. The team had to boil this down into a playable space that was, in reality, tiny. They had to pick their icons: the Golden Gate, the endless farmland of the Central Valley, the neon of Vegas, the sprawl of LA. They were creating a diorama, a greatest hits map, not a simulation of a place. This compromise was locked in. It was the only way to get the game out the door. The team was betting that the novelty of the American trucks and the beauty of their new lighting engine would be enough to satisfy players. They were betting that the community would be so happy to finally have a new, modern American truck sim that they would overlook the comically compressed world. This bet was, as we will see, a miscalculation. The tyranny of scale had forced them into a corner, and the only way out would be a decision so drastic it would risk the entire future of the new franchise. The decision was made, the compromise was locked in. The 1/35 scale was a bitter pill, a pragmatic, production-driven necessity to avoid spending a decade building a single state. The team at SCS Software now faced the monumental task of actually building this compressed diorama of California and Nevada, and they had to do it from their offices in Prague, over 5,500 miles away from the port of Long Beach. This wasn't a matter of just driving down the street for reference. This was an act of digital teleportation, a construction project built on a foundation of data. This was the era of virtual scouting. In a way, the compressed scale made this first step more critical. When you're building a 1:1 map, you can get lost in the details, meticulously recreating every single street. But when you're building a 1/35 diorama, you are forced to become a curator. You must choose the single, most iconic essence of a place. You're not recreating Los Angeles, you're recreating the feeling of Los Angeles, using only a few freeway interchanges, a cluster of tall buildings, and the right kind of palm trees. This is an artistic challenge, not a mechanical one. And it all began, as most great projects do, with a map. The lead map designers would have started with the most basic tools, a high-quality road atlas of the American West, and a large empty whiteboard. They would trace the big arteries first, the mighty Interstate 5, the main street of California running north-south, the I-15, the critical lifeline from LA to Las Vegas, the I-80, cutting east-west across the top of the states. These were the non-negotiable bones of the skeleton. Then the secondary routes, the flavor roads, US 101 winding its way up the coast, and State Route 99, the workhorse of the Central Valley. They'd circle the major cities, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Sacramento, San Diego, Las Vegas, Reno. This was the first pass layout. This was the game. With the skeleton defined, the real work began. The team turned to the single most important tool in their arsenal, the one that made this entire project possible: satellite imagery. Before Google Maps became the ubiquitous utility it is today, its predecessor, Google Earth, was a revelation. It was a digital god's-eye view of the entire planet. The SCS mappers could for the first time fly over their entire territory. They could see the precise winding path of the Sierra Nevada mountains. They could see the stark, pale flatness of the Mojave Desert. They could see exactly where the green, irrigated farmland of the Central Valley stopped and the dry, golden hills began. This key geographic detail, the ability to see the world's biomes from 30,000 feet, was the foundation for the entire look of the game. It allowed them to paint the terrain in their Prism 3D engine with the correct ground textures, ensuring the transition from desert scrub to pine forest felt, at a macro level, correct. Satellite view was for the large forms, but the real magic, the granular detail, came from its companion, street-level imagery. Google Street View was the team's eyes on the ground. This was their boots on the ground without the expensive plane ticket. This key technical detail cannot be overstated. It allowed a 3D artist in the Czech Republic to stand at the intersection of I-10 and I-405 in Los Angeles and look around. They could see everything, and they catalogued it all. The task was immense. Imagine a team of artists each assigned a specific highway. They would drive that highway click by click for its entire virtual length, with a spreadsheet open. They were building a catalogue, a visual Bible for the American West. What was on it? First, the road itself. What colour is the asphalt? Is it dark black or sun-baked grey? Does it have concrete slabs, like many of the freeways in LA? What do the lane markings look like? Are they painted on, or are they reflective dots, those little bumps that make that distinctive thump, thump, thump sound? Second, the signage. This was a colossal undertaking. The United States doesn't just have different signs, it has a whole different language of signage. The artist had to learn the specific shapes, the iconic green rectangles for interstate exits, the mission bell shape of a California state route, the shield of a US highway. They had to get the fonts right, the correct exit numbering, the specific warnings. Truckers, 55 mph speed limit. Way station, all trucks must exit. Steep grade, use lower gear. These weren't just decorations, they were the core gameplay instructions for the player. Getting them wrong would shatter the illusion. Third, the street furniture. This is the clutter that makes a place feel real. What do the traffic lights look like? They're often hung horizontally in California, not vertically like in much of Europe. What do the guardrails look like? The overpass designs, the concrete sound barriers along the freeways, the specific style of telephone poles. The artist would meticulously model these prefabs, creating a library of digital assets they could then stamp into the world. Fourth, the architecture. What does a generic American fast food joint look like? What about a gas station, a strip mall, a motel? The team couldn't get licenses for McDonald's or 7-Eleven, so they had to create fictional, inspired by brands that were legally safe but felt instantly familiar. This is where you get the in-game brands like Eddie's or the Volterson gas stations. They are the recognizable ghosts of their real-world counterparts. Finally, the vegetation. An artist in Prague has to learn the difference between a Southern California fan palm and a desert yucca. They have to find out what kind of scrub brush grows in the Mojave and what kind of oak trees dot the golden hills of the Central Valley. Street View gave them this visual library. The human element in all this is one of painstaking, almost obsessive digital mimicry. You have to picture the scene. A 3D artist, headphones on, sitting in an office in Prague on a grey, drizzly Tuesday. On one monitor, they have their 3D modelling software. On the other, they have Street View, parked outside a virtual taco shop in Bakersfield. They are meticulously recreating the specific style of the stucco, the flat roof, the style of the sign. They have probably never been to Bakersfield. They may never go. But for all intents and purposes, they are there, building a digital replica of a place they know only through a browser. This remote scouting phase was a marvel of resourcefulness. The key historical fact is that the launch version of American Truck Simulator was built almost entirely on this second-hand data. The team used public resources, like photos from Flickr, and even watched YouTube videos posted by real-life truckers, just to see how the world looked from a high-cab perspective. They were digital detectives piecing together a continent from clues. But this method, as powerful as it was, had a ceiling. It was hollow. Data can't tell you everything. It can't tell you what the high desert smells like at dusk. It can't capture the specific hazy quality of the light in Los Angeles. And a top-down satellite image, no matter how high-res, can't communicate the terrifying three-dimensional feel of a steep mountain downgrade. The team had built the 90%, the functional, recognizable shape of California. But to get the last 10%, the soul, they knew they couldn't just rely on the internet. They would have to actually go. Google Street View is a miracle, but it is a silent, sterile, two-dimensional miracle. It's a photograph of a place, not the place itself. The virtual scouting phase had given the SCS team the anatomy of California and Nevada, the skeleton of the roads, the placement of the organs that were the cities, but it had no soul. It had no sound, no atmosphere, no feel. The team in Prague, sitting thousands of miles away, knew they were missing the essential ingredient. They had built a perfect data-driven replica, and they realized it was completely wrong. To capture the vibe of the American West, they had to go there, so they went. A small, dedicated scouting team boarded a plane in Prague and flew 15 hours to the west coast. Imagine the sensory shock. They step out of the air-conditioned terminal at LAX into a wall of warm, dry air. The sky a different shade of blue than they're used to, hazed over with a specific brownish-yellow tint of sun and smog. They get into their rental car, a standard, anonymous sedan that feels impossibly small and low to the ground. And they pull out onto the 405 freeway. This is the first ha moment. It's not a visual, it's a feeling. The sheer, terrifying, glorious scale of it. They are in a 6-lane wide river of steel surrounded by vehicles that seem oversized and aggressive. Hulking pickup trucks, the Ford F-350s and Dodge Rams loom over them, machines that simply don't exist on the narrow streets of Prague. The road itself feels enormous, the lane markings spaced further apart, the overhead signs larger than billboards. They are for the first time not observers looking at a screen. They are participants, and the scale is overwhelming. They drive for hours, leaving the urban sprawl behind and heading east on Interstate 15 into the Mojave Desert. And this is where the second-hand data truly breaks down. Google Maps can show you a straight line on a tan background, but it cannot communicate the emptiness. It cannot convey the feeling of the heat, the way the sunlight seems to bleach the colour out of everything. It can't capture the way the mountains, which look like small hills on the satellite view, loom on the horizon for hours, refusing to get any closer, tricking the eye and distorting all sense of distance. This is where they discover the details their engine isn't ready for. A key technical detail they discovered was the sound and texture of the road surface itself. American highways are not a uniform strip of asphalt. They drove onto the shoulder to take a picture, and the car was shaken by the violent brrrt of a rumble strip, a sound and vibration designed to wake a sleeping trucker. They noted it down. They drove over sections of I-15 made of grooved concrete, and the tyres produced a high-frequency hypnotic whine, a sound completely different from the asphalt 10 miles back. They crossed expansion joints on a bridge, and the car registered a rhythmic ka-thunk that echoed the beat of a song. This was the data they came for. Street view is silent. The real world is a symphony of noise. The team didn't just take pictures, they became audio archivists. They would stand at a truck stop with high-fidelity microphones, recording the hiss of air brakes, the deep-throated thrum of a refrigerated reefer trailer's generator, the distant, echoing chatter of a Jake brake as a truck began its descent from a pass. They recorded the ambience of the desert, the wind, the insects, the total, oppressive silence that follows when you turn the car off. Then, the human element, the cultural pilgrimage. They visited the truck stops, not the small, functional fuel stations of Europe, but the massive, sprawling complexes of the American highway, the pilots, the flying J's, the loves. These were not gas stations. They were self-contained villages, beacons of light in the middle of nowhere. You have to imagine this small team of Czech game developers walking with wide-eyed anthropological curiosity through one of these cathedrals of chrome. They would have been fascinated by the clutter and the culture. They'd see the Chrome Shop, a small store dedicated to nothing but shiny replacement parts, lug nut covers, exhaust stacks, glittering mud flap silhouettes. They'd see the racks of CB radio equipment, the trucker-specific logbooks, the keychains, the weirdly aggressive t-shirts. They'd go into the diner and see the specific hearty, no-nonsense food on the menu. They'd walk the parking lot, which was a sea of polished Kenworths and Peterbilts. Here, they could see what the modding community had been trying to tell them for years. They could see the personalization. One truck would be lit up like a Christmas tree with dozens of tiny chicken lights. Another would be a pristine classic longnose waxed to perfection. They could see the different types of trailers, the flatbeds with their complex straps, the tankers, the cattle haulers. They took thousands of photographs, capturing the texture of the diamond plate steel, the specific way the diesel fuel stained the concrete around the pumps, the placement of the air and electrical lines. The key historical fact is that this first trip fundamentally changed the development philosophy of SCS Software. It was no longer acceptable to guess from a satellite photo. From this point forward, for every single new state added to the game, a dedicated, boots-on-the-ground reference-gathering trip became a non-negotiable mandatory part of the production pipeline. They had learned that the soul of a place is not in its map, but in its details. They returned to Prague, jet-lagged and overwhelmed, with terabytes of new data. They had high-resolution photos of tree bark, asphalt and rust. They had audio recordings of engine brakes and gas station chimes. They had hours of video footage from dash cams, capturing the precise hazy quality of the California light. This treasure trove of real-world data was distributed to the art and sound teams, who could now replace their best guess assets with authentic, reference-based models and sounds. But this new, high-fidelity data created an immediate and painful new problem. They now had perfectly realistic assets, but they had to place them in a world that was a 1/35 scale, compressed caricature. And they had to render it all in an engine that, while great for ETS2, was starting to show its age. They had the authentic ingredients for a masterpiece, but they were trying to cook it in a tiny, outdated kitchen. The Prism 3D engine itself would have to evolve. The high-resolution photos, the high-fidelity audio, the terabytes of raw, authentic data from the American West. It was a treasure trove. The scouting teams, as we saw in Section 7, had returned to Prague with the soul of the American highway stored on hard drives. But now this treasure trove became a massive technical burden. It was like handing a Renaissance master's pigment library to a child with a colouring book. The tool they had, their trusty in-house game engine, was simply not built for this level of fidelity. The engine was, and still is, called Prism 3D. This is a crucial detail. In an industry dominated by two giants, the Unreal Engine and the Unity engine, SCS Software has always stubbornly and brilliantly rolled its own. It's a proprietary piece of technology, born in the 90s and iteratively upgraded, one line of code at a time for over 2 decades. This is a rare and difficult path to take in modern game development, but it was their secret weapon. Why do this? Why not just license a better engine? The answer is specialization. Unreal and Unity are generalists. They are designed to make any kind of game, a first-person shooter, a 2D puzzle game, a sweeping fantasy epic. Prism 3D is a specialist. It is designed to do exactly one thing, and do it better than almost any other engine on the planet: render a massive, seamless, open-world road network at a convincing scale, while simulating the physics of a 40-ton vehicle in the middle of it. The engine's code is laser-focused on data streaming, loading the next piece of road before you see it, on a day-night cycle, and on complex vehicle physics. They don't have to pay licensing fees, and when they need a new feature, they don't have to wait for a third party to add it. They just walk down the hall and talk to the engine team. The version of Prism 3D they were using, the one that had so successfully powered Euro Truck Simulator 2, was already a huge leap over the 18 wheels of steel days. It had a new lighting model, a new physics system, and the ability to handle the 1/19 scale. But America was different. The new data proved it. The ETS2 engine just wasn't good enough. It would have to be torn down and rebuilt again. The first and most obvious problem was the light. The human element here was the art team's frustration. The scouting team came back with these stunning photos of the Mojave Desert, with its bleached-out, brilliant white salt flats under a piercing blue sky. They had photos of the hazy, golden, late-afternoon light of the Los Angeles basin. When the artists tried to recreate this in the existing engine, it looked flat. It looked like a cloudy day in Prague. The engine's lighting model wasn't capable of high dynamic range HDR. It couldn't render a sky that was convincingly brighter than the dashboard, or a sun that actually flared with blinding intensity. The engine's render pipeline had to be rewritten to support HDR and a far more advanced atmospheric scattering model, just to simulate the specific way sunlight interacts with the air in California. This was a deeply complex programming challenge, all in pursuit of a vibe. The second, more mechanical problem was the trucks themselves. As we discussed, an American conventional cab is not a European cab over. The key technical detail was the fundamental change to the physics simulation. The ETS2 engine's physics were all tuned for a truck where the driver sits on top of the steering axle. The entire sense of motion, the pivot point for turning, is different. For American Truck Simulator, the physics programmers had to model a long wheelbase chassis. They had to simulate the way that long, heavy engine block in the front changed the vehicle's centre of mass. They had to model a different suspension, the larger turning radius. It's the reason why backing a long-nosed Peterbilt feels so different from a Scania, and that feel had to be coded from scratch. This is also where they had to build in support for the unique American hardware, like the complex 18-speed Eaton Fuller transmission and its split-shifting pattern, a mechanic that didn't exist in most European trucks. But the biggest, most fundamental, and least glamorous challenge was a simple, hard number: 4. The version of Prism 3D used for ETS2 was a 32-bit application. This key historical fact is the single most important technical hurdle they overcame. A 32-bit program, due to the way computer memory is addressed, can only ever use a maximum of 4 GB of system RAM. It doesn't matter if you have a beast of a gaming PC with 64 GB of RAM. The game simply cannot see or use more than 4 GB. This was a hard ceiling, and they were smashing their heads against it. The new, high-resolution textures from the scouting trips, the new, high-polygon truck models, the massive long view distances of the American desert, the complex city models, all of it had to be crammed shoulder to shoulder into that tiny 4 GB box. It was a bottleneck that made all the other upgrades pointless. The game would crash, it would stutter, it would fail. The entire engine, every line of code had to be migrated, recompiled, and retested to become a 64-bit application. This is a Herculean task. It's the digital equivalent of taking a skyscraper apart brick by brick checking every brick and then reassembling it, hoping you didn't miss one. This multi-year effort, happening in the background while the artists were building the world, was the true foundation of the new game. It unlocked the memory limit. Suddenly the engine could breathe. It could use 8GB and 16GB, 32GB of RAM. It could handle the massive textures, the complex models, and the long draw distances that the American landscape demanded. With an engine that was now 64-bit, had a new HDR lighting pipeline, and a new physics model, SCS was finally ready. The technology was there. But it exposed the next great bottleneck: human resources. The world was massive. The engine was capable, but the team was still small. They couldn't spend a month handcrafting every single freeway interchange from San Diego to Sacramento. It would take a century. They needed a way to build a high-quality, complex and non-repetitive world, fast. They needed a system. They needed digital Legos. They needed the prefabs. The engine had been rebuilt. The new 64-bit architecture, as we saw in the last section, had broken the 4GB ceiling, allowing the new HDR lighting, the high-resolution textures, and the complex physics models to finally breathe. The team had the power to build the American West, but as one bottleneck is solved, another, more stubborn one always appears. In this case, the bottleneck was human. It was time. The SCS Software team was, and still is, a modest-sized studio. They are not a 1,000-person army like the teams behind Grand Theft Auto or Assassin's Creed. They could not afford to spend a man-year handcrafting every single interchange, every single rest stop, and every single city block in California. Remember, even at the compressed 1/35 scale, the map was enormous, a vast digital territory. To build it all by hand, placing every piece of asphalt, every guardrail, every sign one by one, would have been a descent into madness. It would have taken them 50 years to finish the West Coast. They needed a system. They needed a way to build faster, smarter, and more efficiently without sacrificing quality. They needed a way for a small team of map designers to assemble a continent. The solution they developed is perhaps the single most important and least understood piece of their entire technological pipeline. They called it the prefab system. Prefab, of course, is short for prefabricated. In the simplest terms, the SCS map editor, the in-house tool they use to build their worlds, is a giant bucket of digital Legos. These aren't the tiny one-stud bricks. Those are the individual assets and models, like a single tree, a lamppost, or a fire hydrant. No, the prefabs are the big, complex, pre-assembled pieces. A prefab is an entire T-junction. It's a complete highway overpass. It's a full cloverleaf interchange. It's an entire way station, complete with the scales, the pull-forward lights, and the bypass lane. This system is the only reason the game exists. When a map designer is building the stretch of I-15 running through the Mojave Desert, they are not a micromanager. They are a macro assembler. They paint the terrain, lay down the basic spline of the road, and then, when they need a junction, they open the prefab library. They select the 4-lane highway T-junction prefab and just plop. They stamp it into the world. In an instant, they have created a perfect, functional, complex piece of infrastructure. This is a profound leap from the old days. In the 18 Wheels of Steel era, an interchange was often just one single, monolithic 3D model. It was inflexible, terribly optimized, and looked identical every time it was used. The new prefab system is far more intelligent. The key technical detail is what's inside these prefabs. A prefab isn't just the visible 3D geometry, the asphalt, the concrete barriers, the painted lines. It's an entire, self-contained package of data. When the designer stamps that T-junction into the world, that prefab also contains all the invisible, crucial information that makes the game work. It contains the AI splines, the invisible paths that tell the artificial intelligence traffic how to navigate the ramps, how to merge, and where to stop. It contains the nodes where signs are supposed to go. It contains the data for the in-dash GPS, telling it that this is a valid intersection. This is a staggering efficiency gain. The artist doesn't have to place the interchange, and then also spend a day hand-drawing the AI paths, a process that is notoriously finicky and prone to bugs, like AI cars driving into walls. The prefab is guaranteed to work every single time. It's a smart object. This leads to the human element of the system. the specialised and frankly unsung prefab team. Within SCS, there is a small elite team of 3D artists and technical designers who do not build the map. Their entire job is to build the Lego bricks for the map builders. These are the master craftsmen. They will spend 2 weeks doing nothing but building a perfect, optimised and beautiful new cloverleaf ramp prefab, or a specific type of diamond interchange that is common in Arizona. They test it obsessively, making sure the AI flows smoothly, that the geometry is clean, that a 53-foot trailer can actually make the turn without clipping through the guardrail. They are in essence digital toy makers, creating the building blocks for their colleagues. This specialisation allows the map team to work at a blistering pace, assembling the world, while the prefab team focuses on quality and diversity. The key historical fact is that the prefab library is a living, evolving thing. The prefabs that SCS had at the launch of American Truck Simulator in 2016 were, in hindsight, quite limited. The library was small. This is why many players at launch pointed out the repetition. You'd see the exact same freeway interchange outside of Los Angeles, and then again outside of Sacramento, and again in Reno. The map designers only had a few bricks to build with, so they had to reuse them. This is the system's only weakness. Efficiency is the enemy of uniqueness. But the solution is simple, if time-consuming. Just build more bricks. As ATS has expanded state by state, the prefab library has grown exponentially. When the team started working on Oregon, the prefab team had to build a whole new set of prefabs for logging roads. When they got to Texas, they had to build the state's iconic, massive, multi-level stack interchanges and the unique Texas U-turn frontage road system. The visual diversity of the game, its ability to feel like you've actually crossed a state line, is not just a change in ground texture. It's a direct result of the map designers getting a whole new box of Legos to play with, courtesy of the prefab team. This system was the final piece of the production puzzle. They had the 64-bit engine for power. They had the real-world scouting data for authenticity. And now they had the prefab system for speed. They could build a 1/35 scale diorama of California and Nevada. But the diorama felt empty. It had roads, it had cities, it had scenery. But it was missing the stars of the show. It had no trucks. The game was called American Truck Simulator, but at the start of development they didn't have a single real American truck. They had the Majestic and the Sunray, and that was not going to be good enough. They would have to go back to the boardrooms just as they did in Europe and convince the kings of the American highway, Peterbilt and Kenworth, to hand over the keys to their kingdom. The engine was ready. The world, this compressed 1/35 scale diorama of the American West, was built. The prefab system, that massive invisible library of digital Legos, had allowed the map designers to assemble California and Nevada with incredible speed. The stage was set, the lights were on, but the auditorium was empty. The show was called American Truck Simulator, and it was a promise. A promise that, for a frighteningly long period of development, the team at SCS Software was not at all sure they could keep, because you cannot have American Truck Simulator without American trucks. This was the great licensing hurdle. The game, at this point, still only had the generic in-house legally distinct brands from the old 18 Wheels of Steel days. Trucks that looked kind of like a Peterbilt but with a different grille. Trucks that had the shape of a Kenworth, but were called Majestic. The community, the one that had followed them for over a decade, was not going to accept this. Not again. Not in the new, high-fidelity 64-bit world. The bar had been set by Euro Truck Simulator 2, which had, after its own long struggle, secured the crown jewels of European trucking, Scania, Volvo, and MAN. The ATS community didn't just want real trucks, they expected them. It was the fundamental, non-negotiable price of admission. So, the diplomats at SCS, primarily Pavel Shibor and a small team, had to go back to the boardrooms. But this was not Europe. The cultural landscape was different, and the corporate one even more so. In America, the big players are, if anything, even more iconic, more image-conscious. The primary targets were the two titans, PACCAR, the parent company of the legendary Peterbilt and Kenworth brands, and Daimler Trucks North America, which owns the workhorse Freightliner and the rugged Western Star. The human element here is a fascinating clash of cultures. Imagine the scene. A handful of passionate, earnest video game developers from Prague, Czech Republic, are trying to get a meeting with a marketing executive at Peterbilt's headquarters in Denton, Texas. The developers come in talking about polygonal fidelity, physics simulations, and community engagement. The marketing executive in a suit and tie hears one word: game. And that word, game, was poison. To a multi-billion-dollar corporation that has spent 100 years building a brand image of rugged professionalism, reliability, and serious industrial power, game meant Grand Theft Auto. It meant twisted metal. It meant teenagers in a digital fantasy smashing a $150,000 piece of mission-critical hardware into a bridge abutment at 120 miles per hour. The brand damage, the sheer disrespect for the seriousness of their product. The answer, for months, was a polite, firm and repeated no. This was the wall. The brands were terrified of their trucks being misrepresented. They were, in a word, image-conscious, and they believed, with some justification, that video games were a reputation-damaging liability. How could SCS, this small foreign company, convince them that they weren't making a game, but a simulation, a passionate, respectful celebration of their engineering? They fell back on the one strategy that had worked in Europe. They showed their work. As we know, the SCS teams had been on scouting trips. They had visited truck shows. They had taken thousands of photos. So, in a move of bold, almost defiant passion, the 3D art team would often build the truck anyway. This is the key technical detail of the whole process. An artist at SCS, using nothing but reference photos, trucking show brochures, and maybe even a dashcam video they found on YouTube, would spend months building a perfect, pixel-for-pixel, unlicensed 3D model of, say, a Peterbilt 579. This was their spec model. It was built with love. Every gauge on the dashboard was in the right place. Every curve of the bodywork was accurate. They would model the specific stitch pattern on the seats. Then they would go back to the corporation. "Look," they'd say, "this is what we do. Does this look like a toy to you? We have simulated the air brake pressure. We have modelled the exact transmission. We have captured the sound of your engine brake. We are not making fun of your truck. We are honouring it. We are building the most effective, interactive, global advertisement you could ever dream of." This was the Scania strategy, redeployed for the American market, and it worked. Barely. The first domino to fall was PACCAR. Someone high up at PACCAR, someone who either got it, or perhaps had a kid who played ETS2, saw the light. They understood that American Truck Simulator was not a threat. It was a brochure. It was a way to get their brand, their dashboard, their logo in front of millions of people, millions of potential drivers, in a positive, professional context. This was the key historical fact that saved the launch. After years of negotiation, PACCAR signed on. They granted SCS the license for both Kenworth and Peterbilt. It was a monumental victory. But it came with a catch. The licenses were for their new trucks, their modern, aerodynamic, fuel-efficient flagships, the Kenworth T680 and the Peterbilt 579. On February 2nd, 2016, American Truck Simulator launched, and it launched with exactly 2 trucks. The community reaction was a strange mix of profound joy and mild disappointment. They were real. They were licensed. It was really happening. But a T680, a 579, these were the aero trucks, the jelly beans. They were efficient, yes, but they weren't the fantasy. The fantasy of American trucking, the smoky and the bandit dream, was the long-nose classic iron. It was the chrome-laden Peterbilt 389. It was the timeless ruler straight lines of the Kenworth W900, and these were conspicuously absent. The licensing hurdle wasn't a single event. It was a long, protracted campaign that continued for years after the game's launch. The SCS blog became a running, gently sarcastic chronicle of these negotiations. The launch was just the first most desperate battle. The war for the rest of the brands was yet to come. Daimler Truck's Freightliner was a notorious holdout. It took years to get the Freightliner Cascadia into the game, a truck so common on American roads its absence was a running joke. The team at SCS had the truck fully built, sitting in their digital garage for over a year, waiting for a lawyer in Portland to sign the final piece of paper. The same went for Navistar International and Mack. Meanwhile, The modding community, as it always does, stepped into the void. Within weeks of launch, you could download a legally dubious, often glitchy, mod for a Peterbilt 389. This, in a strange way, may have actually helped SCS's cause. They could go back to the manufacturers and say, look, your truck is already in our game. 1 million people are driving a bootleg version of it. Wouldn't you rather we did it officially, beautifully, and ensured your brand is represented correctly? This slow, agonizing, truck-by-truck diplomacy defined the first era of ATS. Each new truck, added as a free update, was a major celebrated event. The eventual arrival of the Peterbilt 389 and later the Kenworth W900 were seen as the true start of the game for many old-school players. This long, frustrating and bureaucratic struggle was, in its own way, as difficult as any of the technical challenges. They had built the engine, and they had built the world. Now finally they had the stars. But there was one more piece of the puzzle, an obsessive, invisible and deeply, deeply nerdy piece. They had the look of the trucks. Now they had to get the sound. The trucks were in. The Peterbilts and Kenworths, those hard-won digital trophies, were finally sitting in the virtual showrooms. The 3D artists, those meticulous digital sculptors, had done their job to perfection. You could zoom in and read the text on the dashboard switches. You could see the specific grain of the plastic on the dash, the faint simulated wear on the seat fabric. The trucks were visually flawless, and yet, when you bought your first Kenworth T680 at the 2016 launch, fired it up and pulled out of the dealership, the feeling was hollow. The problem? It sounded wrong. It sounded like a polite, well-behaved vacuum cleaner. It had the generic, synthesized, dieselish rumble that had plagued the 18 Wheels of Steel series for a decade. The sound was a placeholder, a generic audio file that had all the soul of a spreadsheet. This was the moment the SCS team knew that good enough was no longer good enough. The visual fidelity had just written a check that the audio, in its current state, couldn't possibly cash. Sound is half the experience, maybe more. In a simulation, it is the invisible, primal layer of data that sells the fantasy. You don't see the physics, you feel them, and that feeling is transmitted through sound. You need to hear the groan of the chassis, the whine of the transmission, the chirp of the tyres, and in American trucking there is one sound that is king. One sound that is so iconic, so much a part of the culture, that its absence was a deafening silence. The Jake brake. That glorious window-rattling, car alarm triggering bear, bap, bap, bap of a Jacobs engine brake. It's the sound of a 40-ton rig announcing its presence, the sound of a professional driver using their machine, not just their brake pads, to control a descent. It's the sound that gets angry, no Jake brake signs posted in sleepy towns. To get that sound, and all the other sounds that make a truck, SCS had to become obsessive, professional and slightly mad audio archivists. This began a new, incredibly difficult quest. The human element was, once again, diplomacy. But they weren't seeking lawyers in suits, they were seeking truckers and mechanics. You can't just walk up to a $150,000 rig with a fuzzy microphone and say, "Mind if I record your truck?" This is a professional's tool, it's their livelihood, so SCS had to build new relationships. They leaned on their new partners at PACCAR, who could perhaps lend them a demo truck. They reached out to trucking companies, to fleet managers, and to the passionate show truck owners who babied their classic 389s. They found willing partners, people who, when they heard why this Czech company wanted to record their truck, would light up. "You're putting my truck in the game." And so, on a quiet Tuesday, a sound engineer from SCS would find themselves at a private test track, an empty airfield, or just a very, very remote long straight road standing next to a pristine Kenworth 900, its owner buffing the chrome with a proud smile. Then, the obsessive part began. The key technical detail was not the what, but the how. They didn't just record a sound, they recorded all of the sounds. They brought a mobile recording studio's worth of equipment. This was a multi-microphone surgical operation. They would place tiny, expensive, heat-resistant microphones deep inside the engine bay, as close to the turbocharger as they could get without melting them. They would place microphones right at the exhaust stacks, those towering chrome cannons, to capture the raw, unfiltered bark of the engine. They would place microphones under the chassis, pointed at the tyres, to capture the specific hum and whine of the rubber on different surfaces. And most importantly, they would place a highly sensitive stereo microphone rig inside the cab, exactly where the driver's head would be. This last one was the secret, because the driver doesn't hear the raw exhaust. The driver hears a muffled, insulated, bass-heavy version of the engine, a sound that is filtered through glass and steel and fire-retardant foam. To make the game feel right, you have to capture both the outside Hollywood sound and the inside driver sound. With the truck bristling with more wires than a sci-fi experiment, the recording began. They couldn't just get a drive-by sound. They needed to isolate every part of the truck's voice. This often meant putting the truck on a dynamometer, or dyno, a massive industrial rolling road that allows the truck to go 70 miles per hour under full simulated cargo load while remaining perfectly still. Now, the sound engineer could act as a conductor. Okay, give me 1000 RPM, hold it, now. 1200, now. 1500. They are recording the engine's note at every step of the RPM range, both under load and with no load. Okay, hit the Jake brake, first position, now second, now all three. Now just the air brake, just a psht, again. Now lean on it. Now the horn. Give me the city horn. Good. Now give me the air horn. Now just turn the indicator on. Click, clack, click, clack. Turn on the wipers. Close the door. Roll the window down. Now roll it up. They built a complete granular, almost pathologically detailed library of every single sound that truck could make. This obsessive process, which could take an entire day for just one truck, was the only way to get the authentic ingredients. But recording the sounds is the easy part, relatively speaking. The real revolution was in the implementation. The key historical fact is that SCS moved to a sophisticated audio engine called FMOD. This is what separates ATS from its predecessors. The game is no longer just playing a single sound file. It is a real-time dynamic audio mixer. When you're driving, the FMOD engine is juggling a dozen or more sound samples at once. It's taking the engine at 1500 RPM under load sample, the turbo whine sample, and the exhaust sample, and it's blending them in real time to match your throttle. Then it applies a cab filter, muffling the high frequencies so it sounds like you're inside. When you roll down your window, the game doesn't just get louder, it crossfades to the raw, unfiltered exhaust and tyre samples, and it adds a windrush sound on top. When you hit that Jake brake, it's seamlessly fading in that brutal, glorious brap sample, perfectly pitched to your current RPM. This obsessive, multi-year and incredibly expensive audio recording project, combined with the new audio engine, is the invisible magic that makes the game work. It's what makes it a simulation, and not just a screenshot generator. It's the reason why a quiet night drive, with just the low rumble of the engine and the faint click-clack of the indicators, can be a deeply meditative, almost therapeutic experience. They didn't just capture the look of the truck, they captured its voice. On February 2nd, 2016, the Add to Cart button finally went live on Steam. This was it. After years of development, after the complete 64-bit engine rebuild, after the diplomatic wars for the PACAR licenses, after the terabytes of data from scouting trips, American Truck Simulator was launched into the world. For the team in Prague, it must have been a moment of profound relief, terror, and pride. The digital child they had been nurturing in secret for years was finally walking on its own. For players, it was a day that had been circled on the calendar for years. They downloaded the gigabytes of data, booted the game, and were greeted with a revolution. The very first impression was, without exception, one of awe. The new HDR lighting engine, that same one that had cost so much programming effort, was the star. The opening screen, showing a truck against a Californian sunset, was a statement of intent. This was not the 18 wheels of steel you bought in a jewel case. A new player would start their career taking their first job. They'd find themselves in a stunningly, beautifully, meticulously rendered cab of either a Kenworth T680 or a Peterbilt 579. They'd turn the key and the new FMOD sound system would kick in, a low, authentic rumble, or at least the foundation for what would become an authentic rumble as we saw. They'd pull out of the depot in Los Angeles and the sun would flare on the windshield. The world felt solid, the physics had weight, the truck felt like a heavy, complex machine. It was, in those first 15 minutes, everything they had ever dreamed of, and then they took their first long-haul job. This is where the dream met the cold, hard, spreadsheet-driven reality of the 135 scale. A player, thrilled with their new rig, would pick up a load of electronics in Los Angeles destined for Las Vegas. A legendary drive, the I-15, the great escape to the desert. They'd get on the freeway, marvelling at the new, complex, prefab interchanges, and they'd put the hammer down. And 10 minutes later, they were almost there. Wait, what? They'd pass a sign. Las Vegas, 50 miles. Then, a few seconds later, Las Vegas, 30 miles. The world was rushing by in a blur of compressed time and space. That epic, mind-clearing desert haul, it was over in about 15 minutes tops. This geographic detail, the 1/35 scale, which had been a production necessity, was now revealed to be a critical, game-breaking flaw. The human element of the launch was a perfect, jarring split. The new Steam page, the forums, the Let's Play YouTube videos, they were a sea of conflicting opinions, a wave of bipolar community reception. On one side, you had the 1010 Got Why reviews. These were from players who were simply overjoyed that the game existed. It's beautiful, they'd write. The trucks are real. The lighting is amazing. It's ATS. It's finally here. SCS, take my money. These players saw the game as a platform, as a foundation, and they were thrilled with the quality of that foundation. They were happy to just do short-haul drives around the exquisitely detailed, if small, cities. On the other side, you had the FIFA 10 deeply disappointed reviews. These were not trolls. These were, in many cases, the most passionate hardcore fans of Euro Truck Simulator 2. And they were heartbroken. Wait, that's it? One popular comment would read. I drove from LA to San Francisco and I didn't even have to refuel. The map feels like a tech demo, not a full game. The core complaints were impossible to ignore because they were all completely, undeniably true. 1. The scale. The 135 map was the primary villain. It wasn't just compressed, it was a diorama. It lacked the crucial zen of the long haul. You were always just arriving at your destination. 2. The content. 2 states, and one of them, Nevada, is famously empty. It was a beautiful, vast and very small sandbox. 3. The trucks. Only 2. And as we discussed, they were the aero trucks. The smoky and the bandit fantasy of a chrome-laden Peterbilt 389 was nowhere to be found, except in the mod files that appeared almost instantly. Euro Truck Simulator 2 by 2016 was a mature, sprawling beast. With the Going East and Scandinavia DLCs, it was a massive, content-rich world with a huge, diverse roster of trucks. By comparison, American Truck Simulator felt anemic. It was a beautiful, state-of-the-art appetizer. And the community was hungry. For the team at SCS, this moment must have been terrifying. They had poured years into the technology, and the technology was a success. But the game, the world, the feedback was clear and overwhelming. The 1/35 scale, that pragmatic compromise made years ago in a meeting room, was a critical error. It was suffocating their beautiful creation. They were now at a genuine crossroads. They had a new, successful product that was selling well, but was plagued by a fundamental architectural flaw. They could, in theory, just ignore it. They could continue building new states at 135, cash in on the new franchise, and just let the modders fix the old-school trucks. This is what many, many other game studios would have done. But SCS was not any other studio. They were the small, stubborn team that had spent a decade listening to its fans. They were the ones who had done the impossible by getting the licenses, the ones who had fanatically recorded the Jake breaks. And as they read this tidal wave of mixed, passionate and deeply constructive feedback, they knew. They knew the community was right. They knew the 135 scale was a mistake, and they knew that the only way to save the long-term future of their American dream was to do something so drastic, so risky, and so utterly counterintuitive it seemed like professional suicide. They would have to stop all new work and literally tear their new world apart. The Prague offices of SCS Software were, for all intents and purposes, a success story. They had just launched a brand new, technically sophisticated and highly anticipated title. The sales were strong. The reviews, while mixed, were positive on the core technology. They had 2 licensed, beautiful trucks. They had a new foothold in the most important market in the world. By any normal business metric, it was time to pop the champagne, then get to work on the first paid DLC state. The pipeline, the formula, was working, but the team in Prague wasn't celebrating. They were reading. They were reading the forums, they were watching the Let's Play videos, they were listening to the feedback, and they all heard the same unified and deeply troubling complaint, repeated over and over in a dozen languages. The world, it's tiny. This was the 1/35 scale. That pragmatic compromise made years ago in a production meeting had blossomed into the game's single defining architectural flaw. It was strangling their beautiful creation. The stunning HDR lighting, the FMOD sound, the perfect truck models, it was all just window dressing for a game world that felt like a model railroad, a greatest hits diorama you could cross in a lunch break. The zen of the long haul, the core fantasy, was missing. This was the crossroads. This was the moment that defines a company's soul. Path A was the normal business path, the easy path. You ignore it. You issue a small statement saying, "We hear your feedback on the map scale and will take it into consideration for future titles." Then, you greenlight the team to start building the Arizona DLC, also at 135. You rush it out the door in 6 months. You charge $11.99, and you cash in on the launch hype. You treat the game as a short-term product to be milked, not a long-term platform to be nurtured. This is what 99% of publishers would have done. SCS chose Path B, the path of insanity, the path of the long haul. The human element of this moment cannot be overstated. It was a mea culpa of a kind rarely seen in the video game industry. SCS, just a few short months after the game's launch, published a blog post. It was a post of radical, almost terrifying transparency. They, in essence, said, "You're right, we messed up. The 135 scale was a mistake. It doesn't do justice to the American landscape, so we're going to fix it." This was not a promise to fix it in a sequel. This was a promise to fix the game everyone had just bought. Then, the bombshell. "We're going to stop all new forward progress on map DLC, and we're going to rescale the entire game." This was the great rescale. This was the pivotal, risky, and unbelievably brave decision that would save the franchise. The key historical fact is this public commitment, in mid-2016, to halt all new content development to perform free open-heart surgery on their brand new game. The new target scale? 1 to 20. This wasn't a number, pulled from a hat. This was the new sweet spot, a perfect, hard-won compromise. Euro Truck Simulator 2 was 119. But America's roads, its interchanges, its vast grid-like cities, were different. The 120 scale was chosen because it was the perfect balance. It would, with a simple bit of math, increase the length of every single highway in the game by 75%. The 15-minute drive from Los Angeles to Las Vegas would now be a 26-minute drive. The 10-minute hop from Bakersfield to Fresno would be 17.5 minutes. It wasn't a small tweak. It was a fundamental reimagining of time and space. This was the new breathing room. This was the scale the game should have had all along. The announcement was met with stunned applause from the community. But for the developers, the applause was a distant echo. They were now staring at a technical and artistic nightmare of their own making. What does it mean to rescale a map? This is the key technical detail, and it's so much more complex than just zooming in. You can't just run a script that says make everything 75% bigger. That would just stretch the existing world, making it look distorted and empty. No, this was a manual, painstaking, and utterly colossal act of digital demolition and construction. Imagine a map designer opening the world editor. They would, in a terrifying simplification, have to break the entire world. They'd select the prefab cluster that represented the city of Los Angeles and drag it south. They'd grab San Francisco and drag it north. They'd grab Las Vegas and drag it east. Suddenly, the entire map of California and Nevada was shattered. It was a collection of city islands floating in a void, connected by roads to nowhere that just ended. All those beautiful, complex hand-placed prefab junctions, they were now broken, their connections severed. The AI paths, the GPS data, the scenery, it was all a complete chaotic, broken mess. The game, for months, was an unplayable jumble of code and assets. Now, the real work began. The map designers, now that they had 75% more space between cities, had to fill it. They couldn't just have a long, boring straight line. They had to go back and add new gentle curves. They had to add new rolling hills. They had to hand-paint new terrain, add new scenery, new small towns. They were, in effect, rebuilding the entire road network piece by piece from scratch. They were redesigning the very landscape of the game. The in-progress Arizona DLC, which was being built at 135, had to be scrapped and rebuilt from the ground up at 120. The whole company, every map designer, every 3D artist, was now an all-hands-on-deck Rescale team. They were spending months of developer salary, burning through their launch window profits to fix a product that was already sold. Finally, in December 2016, the Rescale update, version 1.5, was released. It was a massive free patch. Players downloaded it, booted up their game, and there it was, the magic. They pulled out of Los Angeles, and the desert felt like a desert. It was big. It was vast. The horizon felt for the first time far away. The drive was no longer a sprint. It was a journey. This single, incredibly risky, and deeply honourable decision saved American Truck Simulator. It transformed the game from a pretty tech demo into a platform. It was the true second launch of the game. It proved to the community, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that SCS was not a cash grab company. They were custodians. They were in it for the long haul. This act of corporate bravery rebuilt the very foundation of the game, making it stable, beloved, and, most importantly, scalable. Now, with a unified 120 scale, a happy community and a proven engine, they could finally look to the horizon. They could finally start to build out. They just needed a new, efficient and repeatable way to do it. They needed the assembly line. The Great Rescale was a tectonic shift. It was a one-time, cataclysmic, all-hands-on-deck event that had saved the soul of American Truck Simulator. But it was also, by its very nature, chaotic and unrepeatable. The team at SCS Software had successfully rebuilt their foundation, and now that foundation, the new glorious 120 scale, was stable. The community was happy, the engine was capable, and the horizon was for the first time truly open. But a foundation is just a foundation. It was time to build. They had a continent to create state by state, and they couldn't do it with the brute force crisis mode energy of the Rescale. That was a reaction. They needed a process. They needed a proactive, efficient, repeatable and scalable method for creating and delivering entire new worlds on a reliable schedule. They needed, in short, to move from being a construction crew into being a factory. They needed an assembly line. This is the state-by-state pipeline, the complex multi-team machine that SCS has refined to a fine art. It is the single reason they can deliver a stunningly detailed, high-quality, massive new state almost every single year. It's a process that is invisible to the players, but it is a marvel of project management, running in parallel, overlapping, and constantly in motion. It all begins not with a line of code, but with a plane ticket. Stage 1, Research and Scouting. This is the boots-on-the-ground team we first met back in Section 7. But now, they are a formalized, weaponized first strike force. The mission is no longer, go see what California is like. The mission is specific. Go capture Oregon. A small elite team, maybe a lead artist, a senior map designer and a sound engineer, boards a flight from Prague and lands in, say, Portland. They rent an SUV, mount a high-resolution dashcam, and for the next 2 or 3 weeks they live on the road. The human element here is one of intense, focused, almost obsessive data gathering. They are not tourists. They are digital cartographers, and they have a shot list derived from the satellite maps they've already studied. They will drive every single major artery planned for the DLC. They will drive I-5 from the California border to the Washington line. They'll drive US 101 up the entire beautiful winding coast. They'll cut inland on US 26. They are not just seeing it, they are capturing it. They are taking tens of thousands of photographs, not just of the big landmarks, but of the minutiae, the specific green and white design of an Oregon Department of Transportation sign, the texture of the red volcanic soil in the south, the unique architecture of a Safeway supermarket, the specific design of a Welcome to Oregon sign. They are recording audio, the specific sound of traffic on the new porous asphalt of I-5, the unique birdsong in the forests. They are taking gigabytes of 4K video, not just from the dashcam, but handheld video, walking around a rest stop, capturing its vibe. This terabyte-sized data packet is their product. They fly back to Prague and the assembly line truly begins. Stage 2, the map and prefab teams. The data is sorted, tagged and distributed. The map team, the layout designers, get to work. With the scouting data on one monitor and the satellite imagery on the R&D monitor, they begin laying the skeleton. They trace the 120 scale paths of the highways. They are the assemblers. They use the existing prefab library from Section 9 to plop down the standard interchanges, the T-junctions, the rest stops. But they will inevitably and immediately hit a wall. A map designer working on the coast will say, US 101 in Oregon has these unique, beautiful arched concrete bridges. We don't have a prefab for that. Or a designer in the Cascade Mountains will say, I need to build a logging depot, and we have no logging depot assets. Stage 3, the asset and art teams. This is the crucial parallel pipeline. The map designers I need a request goes to the 3D asset team. This is a small, specialized unit of master craftsmen. Their job is not to build the world, but to build the unique pieces that make the world authentic. This is the key technical detail of the whole process. It's what stops the game from being California, but with more trees. The asset team gets the request. They go to the scouting data. They find the exact photos of that Oregon coastal bridge, and they spend the next 3 weeks building a perfect, beautiful, high-polygon, optimized 3D model of it. They build the new logging industry, with its unique buildings, loaders, and clutter. They build the new specific road signs. They build the unique large-scale landmarks, like the volcanoes of the Cascade Range. While the asset team is building these new Lego bricks, the map team doesn't stop. They just build around the empty space, leaving a bridge goes here-sized hole. They move on, laying down roads in a different part of the state. When the new Oregon Coastal Bridge asset is finished and approved, it's added to the prefab library, and the map designer can just drop it in, a perfect fit. Stage 4, integration, AI, and sound. While the world is being physically built, the technical teams are weaving in the invisible magic. The AI team lays down the splines that tell the AI cars how to navigate these new complex interchanges. The sound team takes the new audio from the scouting trip and starts implementing it, making sure the forests of Oregon sound different from the deserts of Nevada. The key historical fact is the overlapping nature of this pipeline. This is the secret to their speed. These are not sequential stages. They're all happening at once. While the Oregon DLC is in the final testing and QA stage, being torn apart by internal testers looking for floating trees and buggy intersections, the map team and asset team are already in full production on the next state, Washington, using data that was gathered months ago, and the scouting team is already on a plane to Utah or Idaho, gathering the next data packet for the next project. It is a non-stop rolling multi-year production line. At any given moment, SCS is actively, in some form, working on 3 or more states simultaneously, one in QA, one in production, and one in research. This is the machine. This is the pipeline. It's how a modest-sized studio in the Czech Republic can, with clockwork regularity, deliver a breathtaking, authentic, and massive slice of the American continent. This system, born from the ashes of the 135 scale and refined with each new release, is what turned American Truck Simulator from a promising, flawed game into an evergreen, ever-expanding hobby. It created a world that players didn't just visit, but inhabited, and it was this deep personal investment from the players that would become the final and most important part of the entire story. The machine was built. The assembly line, that complex overlapping pipeline of scouting, modelling, and prefab stamping, was a marvel of production efficiency. It was a factory for generating place. State by state, the team in Prague, with clockwork regularity, was delivering an authentic, beautiful, and ever-expanding slice of the American continent. They were building the most intricate, beautiful, and realistic model railroad in the world. But a model railroad, no matter how detailed, is a sterile, lonely thing until someone turns on the lights and starts running the trains. The assembly line could build the world, but it could not build the life. It could build the game, but it could not, on its own, build the hobby. That, as it had been from the very beginning, was the community's job. American Truck Simulator is by its very design a solitary experience. It's a game about you, the cab, the cargo, and the endless quiet road. And yet, the one thing we know about humans is that they are irrepressibly social. Give them a tool for solitude and they will, with baffling and beautiful ingenuity, find a way to make it a shared experience. From the instant the game launched, this community convoy, a vast, uncoordinated and unstoppable force of creativity, began to run alongside the official development and in many cases far ahead of it. This force was made of 3 distinct yet interconnected groups. First, and most foundational, were the modders. These were the digital mechanics, the third-party volunteer craftsmen who looked at SCS's beautiful new creation and said, "It's a great start, now let's fix it." They were the direct spiritual descendants of the 18 Wheels of Steel modding scene, but now they had a powerful 64-bit engine to play with. At launch, when the game had 2 aero trucks, who stepped in? The modders. Within weeks, the first, legally dubious but passionately crafted, Peterbilt 389s and Kenworth W900s appeared. They were the ones who gave the old-school players the classic iron they craved, years before SCS could navigate the legal minefields. But they didn't just add trucks, they added everything. The sound modders, like the legendary Kriechbaum, were creating their own high-fidelity audio packs, meticulously recording trucks themselves, giving players a diverse, growling audioscape long before the Fmod update. There were physics modders who spent hundreds of hours tweaking text files to make the suspension feel floatier or the brake bite more realistically. And then there were the map modders. Ambitious, slightly mad projects like Coast to Coast sprung up, attempting to connect the dots and build a quick, crude but functional version of the entire United States using SCS's California as a starting point. This key historical fact cannot be overstated. The modding community acted as a real-time volunteer R&D department. They were, in effect, showing SCS exactly what the community wanted most: classic trucks, better sounds, and more map. They were the vanguard, and their incredible work only raised the bar for what the official content needed to be. Second, there were the streamers and YouTubers. These were the evangelists. In the old days, a game's success was dictated by magazine reviews and TV ads. In the new world, it was dictated by a handful of people with a good microphone and a calm demeanour. People like Squirrel, a British streamer who approached the game not as a crash fest, but as a serious, relaxing simulation. His calm, professional Let's Plays introduced millions of people to the quiet, zen-like joy of the game. These creators were the public face. They translated the often dry technical patch notes from the SCS blog into exciting, tangible features. They were the ones who would get early access to a new state DLC and create a first-look video that would drive the hype, sending the new DLC to the top of the Steam bestseller list on launch day. They were, and are, the game's most effective marketing arm, and their feedback became a direct public line of communication to the developers. And third, there was the strangest, most creative, and most profoundly human part of the community: the virtual trucking companies, or VTCs. This is the element that truly turns the game into a hobby. ATS is a single-player game. There is no multiplayer button, and yet thousands of players were playing multiplayer. They were inventing it. How? Through spreadsheets, Discord servers, and a shared, honor-system fantasy. A VTC is, in essence, a club. A group of players will decide on a name, Apex Trucking and Maverick Logistics, a fictional brand, and a custom paint job, created by a modder, of course. They will create a hierarchy, a CEO, dispatchers, and drivers, and then they will work. The technical detail here is the invention of a metagame. A driver for the VTC wouldn't just pick a random job, they would go to the company's Discord server. The dispatcher, another player sitting at home, would consult a spreadsheet and assign them a load. We need you to take a load of lumber from Eureka, California to Boise, Idaho. Use the company paint job. The driver would then boot up their single-player game, find that exact job in the freight market and run it. When they were done, they would take a screenshot of the delivery confirmation and submit it to the dispatcher, who would then update the master spreadsheet, tracking the company's income. This is astounding. The desire for a shared, social and structured experience was so strong that the community built a massive, complex and entirely imaginary layer of corporate role-playing on top of the game. And then they took it a step further. The Convoy. Using a third-party mod called Truckers MP, which forcibly injected multiplayer into the game, often with chaotic, hilarious and physics-defying results. These VTCs would organise massive 50-truck convoys. They would all meet at a virtual truck stop, all painted in the same livery, and set off in a single screen-lagging file to make a massive delivery. SCS watched all of this. They had always listened. They saw the mods for classic trucks, and they redoubled their licensing efforts. They saw the streamers, and they started the SCS on the Road show. And they saw the VTCs, the spreadsheets, the chaotic multiplayer mods. They saw the profound desire for a shared experience. And in their ultimate we are listening moment, they did the impossible. In 2021, SCS released the Convoys update. This key human element, this official, built-in, 8-player co-op mode, was a direct, loving, and beautifully engineered response to the VTCs. They didn't just acknowledge the community, they hired the core developers of the main Truckers MP mod and built their dream into the fabric of the game itself. This is the final, beautiful truth of American Truck Simulator. It is not a game made by a company in Prague. It is a shared, living platform. SCS builds the world, and the community gives it life. From the modders who add the chrome, to the streamers who share the journey, to the VTCs who invent a shared purpose. They are the convoy. They are the lifeblood of the highways. They are the ones who took a piece of brilliant software and through sheer collective passion, turned it into a sweet, strange, and never-ending digital home. And so our chronicle for this evening comes to a gentle close. The story of American Truck Simulator is one of quiet persistence, of a small team's stubborn dream and a community's incredible creative passion. It's a story of pixels and code, yes, but it's also a story of chrome and diesel and the undeniable romance of the open road, captured in a bottle. The digital dashboard lights cast their soft, steady glow. The road unspools before you, a ribbon of asphalt disappearing into a darkness that is, for once, warm and inviting. The rumble of the engine is a deep, comforting, predictable friend. The world outside the cab is asleep, and so perhaps it's time for you to be as well. The deliveries can wait. The freight will still be there in the morning. There is no deadline tonight, no dispatcher on the line. There is only the hum of the tyres, the soft sound of the fan in your room, and the long, peaceful night ahead. We have reached our destination for this journey, so park the rig, set the brake, and kill the engine. The silence that rushes in is a welcome one. Thank you for joining me on this long haul. Sweet dreams.